Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 249th edition of the weekly Frank and Stan chat. And if you're wondering why, I just repeat this again, Stan, why we go Frank and Stan is because if you use the sort of transcription service, it always comes up as Frankenstein. So that's why we always say Frank and Stan. But for those of you watching on video, you'll see that we have a guest. Richard Ronksley. Hello. Hi, Richard.
Hello there. Hi there, Frank. Hi.
Yeah,
Nice to meet you.
Yeah,
Nice to meet
thank
you.
you very much for joining us. Stan, how are you this morning?
I'm okay. We're in well, somewhere we've been before, but this time with my elderly mother-in-law, we are now on busy times trying to sort her out and keep her going and taking her to the places she needs to go. So our sort of day-to-day life's been a bit disrupted for the last 3 or 4 weeks,
Right.
and we're just trying to manage how we can. Because when it comes to the summer and we're caravanning and everything else,
What happens then?
I'm not sure what happens then. And we've been through this with my mother, and just as that sort of part of my life has finished, we're now turning the corner and doing the same thing.
The passage of time.
Yeah.
Richard, thank you for joining us. We spoke a few months ago. My circumstances work-wise have changed a bit since then. But I wonder if you just introduce yourself and just a little bit about your career, about what you're doing now. And I think the interesting fact, about how did you get into the job you're in, probably is a fascinating...
Diddly-dee. Yeah, absolutely. I'm currently chief executive of Altus Education Partnership, which is a multi-academy trust based in and really for Rochdale. So we're very locally focused, and both in terms of education and local communities. It's a trust of 5 schools at the moment. We've got 3 schools that have just resolved to join us, and then we've got a number of other schools that are in sort of trust partnership agreements, but obviously the decision lays in their hands. I think we probably follow a lot of the Confederation of Schools Trust things about the nature of trusts rooted in their community, and this belief that we've over the last 20 or 30 years we've seen a sort of perhaps a decline and a fragmentation of the welfare state, and in many respects we can use schools as hubs for local communities, hubs of pride, but also of resource, be that in terms of educational aspiration or food and clothing, or just as a community centre. So it's a really deeply rooted trust. How I got here is interesting, because it's not really the job I applied for. I applied for the principal. My background and my entire career, I'm possibly quite unusual in that my background and career is mainly in further education and post-16 education all the way through. And I know most MAT CEOs come from the secondary or perhaps primary sectors. So that's perhaps given me a slightly different slant. So that's where I came from, and the job I applied for was principal of Rochdale Sixth Form College, and I was a very proud principal of Rochdale Sixth Form College, which if you look at the DFE performance tables, you will see that it does incredibly well, nationally, locally. So and it's a real unalloyed sense, source of pride for the entire borough of Rochdale, I think. So it was a great pleasure and pride to actually get that role and have that role. But in the corner of the advert, there was a little thing that said, and CEO of Altus Education Partnership. And I remember thinking, oh yeah, all right, okay, we'll see about that. And then things grow. But it's interesting, we had a little brief conversation about how we got there. And I think sometimes how I describe it is I sort of stumbled into that role, and there's a danger that sounds as if it's overly humble or whatever, just happened. But I think if to stumble into a role, you have to do something in your career, and you have to walk a particular path, and you might stumble, and I suppose it's just stopping and noticing what you see and thinking, will I like to take advantage of that or that? And I think that's what I've done in my career and why I've ended up where I am. I've walked along, stumbled into things, thought that looks interesting, and then pursued that. And like I say, that's where I am today, and that's
Wow.
how I got there. Although I'm sure it was more complicated and more convoluted.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, Stan, when we think about our own careers?
Yeah, I was sat in a pub. Not often I sit in a pub and talk to a head teacher, but after a few beers, I mean, we do know that we followed a very similar line, albeit sort of a 10-year gap between us. Um, but it was that conversation of, well, why did you go there? And it stunned me to think, actually, the whole of my career is accidental, coincidental. I mean, if you go right back to the start, why did I go into teaching? Well, my mother was a teacher, so it was always a likely career for me. But the truth is that at sixth form, I was more interested in football and stuff. And when it came to people saying, "So are you applying for university?" I kind of went, "Oh yeah, not really thought about that." And well, you're too late really now. Blah blah blah. Where are you thinking of applying? Mather College in Manchester. Oh, you're getting there, and that was it. My career was decided. A bit of laziness on my part. I remember the tutor saying, "Well, tell you what to do. Ask them if you can do a master's. That'll frighten them to death and to let you in."
It will show some ambition.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, yeah. So I suppose, in a sense, the fact that we met, Stan, in 1995, that the chances of that, what I mean, and the circumstances that led to that, and it always makes me think. I don't know if I've ever mentioned this, but I met my wife, Richard, at Prinish Abbey in Cheltenham. And so she was a sixth form student, just about to go to university, and so all the students were all the females from the school were at this monastery. And a friend of mine said, "Would you like to come down to Prinish Abbey?" And I thought, what do I want to go to a monastery for the weekend? They then said, well, there were 60 of these sort of 18-year-olds down there, so I decided to go. And it's all those sort of decisions that you make in your life about how it's woven together in its unpredictable way. But anyway, Stan, what's caught your eye this week?
Well, it's something that you've, I think, rattled on, I think November, where they looked at the new curriculum. I've never really picked up on it until I was watching some clips from Ken Robinson, and also at the same time got an email to say, have you looked at what's going on with media education? I think because they know we've talked about it. And I hadn't realised that the thoughts are at the moment a mandatory primary program and secondary program on media education or media literacy. And I thought that's probably, if we do it right, it's probably the most Ken Robinson thing we've done in education for a long time. Because he had a thing about not knocking creativity out and about real world stuff, not teaching. It always reminds me of Mick Waters as saying, stop trying to make things real world when they're not. It'd say, you do a maths problem about, you have £25, you put 5 gallons of petrol in the car, petrol is this much, how much change do you get? And he said, nobody does that. Nobody I know ever puts so much, you just either fill your car up or you just do it until you've had enough, and then you don't start calculating all that. He said the only maths involved in doing that is remembering the number of the pump. I always remember that thing.
Yeah.
The number of times at school we've measured the floor with the trundle wheel to work out how much the carpet would cost if we did that. All nonsense things. And I worry that this will turn into that kind of approach.
Right.
We'll make up media stories that are easy to decipher and not look at we need to look at the language, we need to look at what they're saying, how can we check those facts? What worries me, I think, is I'm fairly confident primary teachers could do that, but not if somebody dictates the curriculum to them.
Yeah, I don't know.
Literacy pack
Yeah.
feeling about this.
Richard, what's your take on that?
I think I'm actually a great fan of media studies bit and media literacy,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the biggest changes of the 20th century were, in terms of communication, were around media. It's a valid area of study, but also the insight it gives young people into the way in which information is presented and how they can discern is essential. And I do agree that media literacy, social media literacy are really, really important. I think, not my concern, but it's almost, if we're going to go down this road, it's how we approach it, because I think there is a danger that what happens is it ends up as a module in tutorial that that we have to go through and nobody really understands, and that actually we do it to death at primary and then we move on to second and we're doing the same thing, and it isn't correctly sequenced and becomes more sophisticated as we go on. And I think the other thought that I had really was, when we're talking about that, actually, how can we embed that in all of the curricula that we teach? Because it is embedded, because in many respects, all of the subjects that, be it art, science, history, French, sociology, grammar, they've all got rational rules and laws within which we operate. The rules of grammar, the rules of perspectives, Boyle's law, however you want. And actually, for you to pass those courses, for you to succeed, for you to gain deep knowledge and understanding that you can apply to original contexts, then you have to follow those laws. And yes, play with them as you become more sophisticated, but you need to understand those. And it's almost, I think, we've already got that rationality in class in those subjects. All we're asking young people and adults actually to do is take that rationality and apply it to the media world, the online world, so that we can use those skills in the same way. So I think the skills are already there and they're already being taught. It's just how we link the two together, and it doesn't become a ghettoized subject that is just poorly understood, something we have to get through. And the primary kids will do it at secondary and post-16 and say, well, we've been doing this already.
Yeah, I think that it reminds me of IT. When IT came into primaries, and it was a completely separate subject. And I had an epiphany, or I didn't, but a head teacher had. I was in a school this week and he said, you know what, we're going to use the IT room for something else. We hardly ever use it now because they've all got access to iPads in the classroom and everything. And I said, hallelujah. There was nobody more than me saying, don't build IT centres. You don't need IT suite. You need IT embedded in what children are already doing. And I agree with you that that's exactly the same thing, Richard, that we've got to make it part of the curriculum and not an add-on where you stop everything else for an hour and look at media studies.
It's funny though. Go on, Richard.
Oh, no, I was going to say maths as well. An understanding of risk. You look at that. There is such a correlation between individuals who perhaps have trouble with numeracy and understanding risk, and belief in conspiracy theories and misinformation. So just having that opportunity, and it would make it so much more. Using that phrase, stay real and wow, yes, yeah.
It's funny. We had a guest on a couple of times, an author who's a secondary school head of English at a school out in West Yorkshire, Jenny Webb. And Jenny was passionate about literature and the need to actually understand, the complexities of an argument that's laid out in a story, because actually it's important that young people have that sort of level of understanding so that they can interpret or detect bias and misrepresentation. And so for her, that was a sort of social justice thing, that some of the more vulnerable students, in terms of having lower attainment, that her view was that those are at greatest risk of being manipulated, and in a way it was our duty to enable them for their future to be able to sort of realize when they're being tricked or harmed or being persuaded to do something. So I thought it was a really powerful argument, which again plays into the English, plays into the maths, doesn't it? It plays into the history curriculum. All of this stuff is really relevant, for this issue. Richard, What's caught your eye this week? I think we're going to go back here to the
We're going.
the oldest artifact we've ever had on the Frank and Stan.
Don't talk about Richard like that, because we're both old.
Well, I still think of myself as a youngster.
You are
I often say to people,
Until
sorry, Richard,
Sorry.
I always say to people, there's a 25-year-old inside me who wonders what happened.
Absolutely. It's this book here, which is called the Catholic Christian Instructor, published somewhere around 1750. And you were asking me to what I caught my eye, and it's a book that's on my bookcase at home. I was just looking around for something to read, and I came across that again after years and years and years. And it's interesting. It's got an interesting history. I mean, first of all, most recently, it's a book that actually, as a teenager, I did save from a bonfire. As an aged relative's house was being cleared out, and I remember my uncle coming with a barrow load of books actually, and he was just going to tip them on the bonfire. And there are images there. Aren't there? Really, there are images there going back to book burning and Fahrenheit 451 and Nazi Germany and all the rest. And there was something that just felt absolutely wrong, and I stopped him. And this is one of the books that I saved. And I think there are two things about it. One, it's a really, I haven't read the full book because, to be honest, it would it's pretty turgid stuff. But what it is it's an instructional guide for Catholics, telling them what to think and what to believe, and looking at their personal aspects of their life and how they should conduct their life. It's really interesting. It made me reflect on that use of the word instruction, really, and instructed, because I mean it's interesting, isn't it, how religious instruction turned to religious studies that return to, now we do religious education. Yes. And there's that, so religious education then to religious studies, and there's been a change, really, isn't it, from a society where there is that is the truth and that is the way, to more relativism. And it links into what you were talking, Stan, about social media literacy, where we're in danger of moving to something where there isn't any objective reality, and actually it's just everybody else's truth. Yes. So I thought that was sort of something that really interested me. But the really pertinent thing is, because I do think potentially this book remains with the family all the way through this time, it does have a few inscriptions both in the front and in the back, and I'll just read two of them. So the first one, it says, Joseph Townend book, called Catholic Christian, Proofs in It, written by Old Townsend, January the 30th 1785, this done for the owner of this book. So that wonderful little message, and it always makes me shiver when I read that somebody has done that and named that as their own book. And then, because this is an educational podcast, right at the end, written around this wonderful little picture of maybe a tulip between two daisies, is the final inscription. And it comes to Joseph Townend, who may or may not be related to me. I've got no idea who he was. Joseph Townsend book, written with his own hand and pen, January the 30th, 1785. God give him grace on it to look, and not to look but understand, that learning is better than house and land. When house and land is gone and spent, then learning is most excellent.
Wow.
And for me, that's it, isn't it? I mean, we perhaps are in a world where house and land is seen as the most important thing, but actually learning, that's what it's about.
Yeah. Wow. I mean,
I've got an old book somewhere that I was just turning around before to see where I put it, but I had it out the other day. It's called An Experiment in Education. It's about the 1930s, I think, and it's a teacher explaining how she did different things, and the one page I always go to is a piece of artwork that a child did that wasn't very good, and she said, if I hold this up and tell everybody in the classroom that this is good, I will lower standards, I will undo my professionalism with my relationship with the children, yeah, I have to praise it. So I have to praise it for the effort he has put in rather than the quality of the product he's
Yes.
produced. And I think, that's really, really important now. And it was in the 1930s, according to this teacher.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just how we assess and more importantly, how we feed back. And the number of
Absolutely.
children I suspect who get told they've done really, really well without differentiating to say what they've done well with their effort, but you need to raise your game when it comes to your final product.
Hey, Richard, can I just deviate a little bit? I used to be the independent chair of the Blackpool Education Board, and in Blackpool, for whatever reason, attainment levels at certain key stages is lower than everybody would want them to be. The causes of that are open for debate, but actually the town itself has two very successful sixth form centres. So there's Blackpool Sixth Form, and there's the
Yeah.
Blackpool Fylde College, both of which are very, very successful. And it sort of always it's always made me wonder. And yes, some of the attainment in Rochdale is well, again, it's the same situation. Some of it may not be as high as some people would expect to be or would want it to be. But in both of those towns, there are very, very successful post 16 providers. Oh, and I'm just intrigued as to how does that happen? Because actually you would think, well, we're on this sort of like path of sort of progress, perhaps at key stage 3 and 4, but then something's happening at the post 16 world where the provision seems to be of a higher quality than some of the other providers, lower down the line, shall we say?
It's interesting, and it's really interesting point, and you never want to come and never do come as colleges coming from a sort of ivory tower position, or it's the cavalry coming in position, because actually the work that we do at post 16 with young people is only possible because of the continuous and dedicated work of colleagues in primary and secondary
Yes.
sectors. Yeah, so absolutely there is there is acknowledgement there, because those young people don't miraculously change. All we do is create an environment in which that they can then thrive. I think though, and if I talk nationally, I think
Yes.
that there is. You do look at what happens at primary education, and I'm not going to say anything new here, Frank. I promise you. I'm just going to
I
say,
doubt we
yeah, absolutely. But you look at that, and you look at primary education, and where young people get to at the end of primary, and to what extent are we fully taking advantage of that at secondary education, and building on those skills, and knowledge, so that we can really take them on further. And I am minded of a little bit when I was chatting to a lady who's head teacher of an all through school. And she started her career was mainly in primary, and she was a head teacher at primary, and then she moved over to be head of the whole school. And she said, what happened was I found myself coming across students who at primary they knew exactly what they had to do, and they did it, and they'd come into our secondary and they didn't know what they were supposed to do, and they certainly weren't doing what they were supposed to do. And it's that overlap, I think. So there's something. So I think, well, yes, there are all sorts of challenges. There's something in that transition phase where we really get them in those first years. And like I say, I'm not saying anything that
No.
secondary heads and primary heads and secondary and primary don't know about. And I think all that post 16 and has the opportunity to do is almost that new start after that opportunity, and set some really clear expectations. And I think there is a big thing as well, where we've got a very, very objective, clear baseline,
Yeah.
even more than the primary, where we're saying, right, okay, so that is your attainment now. we get that this is the type of qualification you go on to, and this is the type of qualification you go on to.
Somebody had a conversation with me about I did some work in Stoke, particularly looking at competition in maths, and it was startling how the secondary year 7 had no idea really what had gone on in primary. They had their own curriculum, and that's where all the children started. But he said, the remarkable thing about primary is you get children coming in at 4, 5 who can't read, can't recognise letters and numbers, and in the few years that they're at the end of it, they're discussing Shakespeare. What happens then for the next 5 years doesn't seem to be the same rate of acceleration as been in those first 7 years. And as you say, we're not picking it up and running with it.
But there are things we can do, and I would like to say our trust are doing. We have a head of secondary and a head of primary, and one of the parts of those, so a head of primary education, the line manager of primary and secondary heads. But the role of the head of primary education isn't just to support the head teachers, it's to champion primary pupils into the secondary sector and look at transition. So she's been working with both the head of secondary, but also secondary heads and primary heads in primary partner schools. I never use the term feeder schools because that is my post-16 background. No such thing as a feeder school. And working with them to actually say, right, how can transition work, and what's happening, what's missed out, and there are frustration and missteps either side because everybody's so busy or however, and actually to intervene in that and say, right, okay, so how are we going to make these taster sessions useful so the students get a useful start to their program, and how are we going to follow that through so we don't lose them in that first year or two. It's a big task, but I think there are things we can do about it.
I think that the secondary people that I was working with at the time were throwing in problems that I hadn't really appreciated. Like, we get children from 30 different schools with 30 different experiences, and it's not easy just to amalgamate them and work out where they are and take them forward. So I do appreciate it's not an easy fix. But somebody needs to know what's gone on in primary so that they don't repeat it in year 7 at nauseum.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I was in a year 10 maths class 2 weeks ago where the young people were very, very obedient. I think that's probably the word I'd use. They were obedient, but actually they weren't learning very much. And the reason why I knew that they weren't learning very much or they were repeating work that they'd done in year 6, was I went and asked them, and the only difference I could tell as a primary practitioner and to what the maths teacher was teaching them in year 10 was use of the word variable. That was the only difference. I don't think the primary school year 6 teacher would have used that word. They may do. They may be better mathematicians than me. But actually that was the only thing that was different. And it really sort of struck me on that day about, well, I was amazed that the children were not more disruptive, to be honest, because they could do that work. They were repeating work. It was no relevance to that work,
Let's keep going back to Stan's point. Media education, you can see the danger of that happening at social media education at primary. You get it, and you're doing the same thing.
Probably, I think the best example is modern foreign languages, because there's no connect whatsoever normally between the primary school and the secondary schools, a range of secondary schools, into which modern language they've looked at. And often in primaries, it's does somebody know a bit of French? Does somebody know a bit of Spanish? That'll be what we'll do then. We'll do French because the deputy head got an A level in French once.
That's exactly the case in Rochdale. It is to do with recruitment, but you look at the majority of French is the largest most popular subject in primary. Secondary schools, it's Spanish, and it's how that is. Now, that's nobody's fault how that's happened.
No.
It is the way the systems work. There's a really interesting one. Can I go down this? Have we got time?
Yeah.
You have got time. Yeah,
There we go.
We've got 30 minutes, so you've got time.
There's a really interesting one where Hamer Primary School, which is one of the schools that just resolves to do it, they do Latin at primary. That's a really interesting thing that they're doing, and I'm really, I've had a lot of conversations about this, because the only time I've ever come across Latin previously taught in state schools is something that you taught to top set, yes, and 11 to go on. But actually, fundamentally, teaching it at primary school does a number of things. It helps us with, it helps with English and etymology. It helps us with modern foreign languages when you move forward, because it doesn't matter if you go on to Spanish or French, because they're Italian languages. It helps you with scientific terminology. It expands that vocabulary, and it gives you a real base. And it really is a joy, watching that and watching it. And actually, as much as it is seen as an elitist subject, Latin is pretty basic, in terms of its grammatical and linguistic structure. So actually, the people teaching it there are not, classicists, that they've learnt Latin themselves. So I think there's a real opportunity there. But again, it's not something that we're going to come in as a trust and go do this, but it's something that is part of a discussion about, well, how can we support both literacy and improve the uptake of languages? Really important for young people.
Yeah,
I do like to look at the origins in primary schools of choosing that, because it is quite often, we had a teacher who could speak a bit of French.
Yeah.
Teachers normally speak French or do a bit of French because when they were at school, that was what you did as your modern foreign language. Very few did Spanish, and yet the reality is probably more of our children go to Spain than go to France.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just move. I'll quickly do mine. But when I was in the CEO at the co-op, we had a link with a charity that would enable us to have Chinese-speaking teachers come in, and this was a free program run through Manchester Grammar School, actually. And the initial assumption was that, this is going to be really successful for your top sets, in a sense that they're the ones that, no, that was not our experience whatsoever. This was a completely level playing field. Level playing field. There was nothing in a way that they had learned previously. There was actually those early weeks that was actually going to determine whether you were successful or not. The one thing that did prove you were successful is your willingness to learn it, and to actually put a bit of time into it. So we were finding some children who were perhaps not that motivated, but could see that actually it was a fresh start for them. So it was really interesting the way that worked through, so it's a real leveler. There were no assumptions, Anyway, what for me...
My son's got an O-level Japanese.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah. That's been really useful.
The thing for me is I've been a big critic of the Ofsted framework, and I've not hidden that. And I've not met this guy, and I'm not really a great fan of how to get a good Ofsted, but there was a book that Paul Garvey's written called Taking Control 3, and the only reason I bought it was primarily because he referenced some work that I and Professor Colin Richards had done. So I just looked at it. I found it interesting that it said Frank Norris CBE. Well, I haven't got a CBE, but anyway, we'll let that one go. But the thing is that a previous guest of ours, Edmund Barnett Ward, wrote the introduction, and I was going to read part of it, but we haven't really got time. But I think the introduction itself is worth reading. But I attended a meeting this week with quite a number of the trade unions, professional associations, interested parties around the impact of Ofsted. And I have to say, I was unguarded. I felt frustrated that, because I'm receiving calls from teachers and head teachers, CEOs, who are unhappy with what. It's not just the judgments, but it's basically how the process has not shifted sufficiently in their eyes or in mine from where Ruth Perry was, and the report and the coroner's report, which is very, very damning. When you review where we're at the moment, you just feel as though we've not moved on. The inspectorate has actually, sort of like has made it look as though they've changed, but actually, fundamentally, it's still the same process. And I just feel as though the senior leaders that I've met very recently, they're talking exactly the same way as they were to me prior to Ruth Perry's death. And I just feel as though we've not progressed it. And this week I was involved in head teacher appointments, and I actually think it's a real sort of we've got to have a challenging inspection process, but it also needs to be much more mindful of who we're dealing with and the vulnerability of leadership. I really feel as though I don't think we've overcome that problem. And I just felt, as I did let rip this week, and I wasn't the only one. There were two of us that just, when you get into a discussion and you end up with another colleague just geeing you up a little bit more. But I still feel it's the one thing I feel most passionate about is having a more reliable and more humane inspection process. So Paul Garvey's book will help you perhaps with your inspection, but I think the introduction is a damning indictment of Ofsted and how it's reacted to Ruth Perry, and included in that, unfortunately, and I say that genuinely, unfortunately, is the current government and its lack of action to try and address some of these issues. So please read it. In fact, what I'll do is put the link on the at the end of this video. As it says, Edmund says, and you all deserve a system that truly sees you, values you, and helps you thrive. Until that day comes, we need to help each other as best we can. We might as well start with the pages of this book. Right. What have you got planned this weekend then, Richard? What's life going to be this weekend?
Oh, I'm just going to go and see my daughter, so I haven't seen her for some while. So
is that locally?
No, it's down in Oxford, so
right.
I'm looking forward to seeing her. Yeah.
Stan, what have you got lined up?
A brunch on Sunday at a relative's house. We've had to shift it round because the football's on. So
right.
It was going to be lunch or dinner. That was the choice, and we suggested brunch might be better. So, but yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, and we're off on it. My wife and I are off for a meal in Manchester on Saturday to see some friends that we see twice a year. So that's what's lined up for us all. I hope your weekends and your next few days, if you get some downtime as a teacher or a head teacher, whatever, that you get some rest and peace and enjoy life, because that's why we're there to educate, but we're also there to enjoy our own lives as well. Because I'm sure that actually, if you enjoy your life a little bit more, it will spill over into the classroom. I think we find that. So thank you, Richard, for joining us. We'd love to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Richard.
Yeah, it's been great. So thank you, Stan. I'll see you. Well, edition 250.
Yeah.
Now there's something here, isn't there? So it might not include Stan.
Yeah.
It might be Frank on his own. But anyway, edition 250 is next week, so we'll be back for another edition then. So until then, take care. Thank you, Richard. Bye bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye.